people think empaths are harmless, soft-spoken, compassionate, sensitive. But psychology tells a darker story. Because the same nervous system that makes an empath deeply caring can also make them dangerously perceptive. They notice micro-expressions before words are spoken. They sense emotional shifts before other people even realize they're happening. And over time, that emotional radar becomes a weapon most people never see coming. The truth is, every empath has a dark side. And if you misunderstand it, you can destroy your relationships, your mental health, and even your identity without realizing it. An empath's brain is often highly reactive to emotional stimuli. Research on mirror neurons suggests some people experience stronger emotional resonance when observing others. Their nervous system doesn't just understand emotion, it absorbs it. That's why crowded rooms exhaust them. That's why toxic people drain them. And that's why manipulation affects them differently than the average person. But here's where things get dangerous. When someone spends years absorbing emotions, reading hidden intentions, and surviving emotional chaos, they develop psychological survival, tools that can become incredibly dark. An empath can learn to read weakness faster than most trained negotiators. They can detect insecurity in someone's tone, posture, eye movement, and hesitation. Not because they're psychic, because their brain has spent years scanning for emotional danger. This is exactly how hypervigilance develops. In psychology, hypervigilance is a trauma response where the nervous system becomes constantly alert to emotional threats. Many empaths grew up in unstable environments where reading moods was necessary for survival. If a parent's mood changed, danger followed. If tension entered the room, conflict exploded. So the empath's brain adapted, and adaptation creates power. That power can become compassion or manipulation. That's the part nobody talks about. Some empaths become masters at emotional control. They know exactly what words trigger guilt. They know when silence creates anxiety. They know how affection can create dependency. And because they understand emotion deeply, they can influence people without appearing aggressive. That's why emotionally intelligent people can become emotionally dangerous. The dark empath is one of the unsettling personality patterns researchers have started discussing. Unlike a narcissist who lacks empathy entirely, a dark empath understands emotions perfectly, but uses that understanding strategically. That makes them harder to detect. A narcissist dominates loudly. A dark empath dominates quietly. They study you first. They learn your fears. They learn what validation you crave. Then they position themselves as the only person who truly understands you. And once emotional dependency forms, control becomes easy. But here's the twist most people miss. Many empaths don't even realize they're doing this. Because their dark side often comes from emotional exhaustion, not evil intentions. Imagine absorbing stress, conflict, anxiety, and emotional pain for years without boundaries. Eventually, the nervous system reaches overload. The brain enters survival mode, and survival mode changes personality. This is where empathy becomes emotional aggression. The empath stops explaining and starts withdrawing, stops trusting, stops forgiving, stops caring. And when an empath finally detaches emotionally, people experience a version of them that feels ice cold. That transformation shocks people because it feels unnatural. But neuroscience explains why it happens. Chronic emotional stress increases cortisol levels. Over time, emotional burnout can reduce patience, empathy regulation, and emotional tolerance. The nervous system shifts from connection into defense. That's why some empaths suddenly become numb. Not because they lost emotion, because they overloaded emotionally. And overloaded people become unpredictable. This is also why empaths sometimes attract narcissists repeatedly. Psychologically, narcissists seek emotional supply. Empaths naturally provide emotional attention, validation, and understanding. In the beginning, it feels like intense connection. But over time, the empath becomes emotionally consumed. And eventually, the dark side emerges. Most people think empathy is harmless, a soft trait, a gentle personality type, something innocent. But psychology tells a far darker story, because the human brain was never designed to feel everything all the time. And when someone develops an extreme sensitivity to emotion, the result is not always kindness. Sometimes it becomes power, terrifying power. Studies in neuroscience show that certain people display heightened activity in brain regions connected to emotional processing and social awareness. Researchers studying mirror neurons discovered that some individuals don't just observe emotions. Their nervous systems internally simulate them. Another person's fear can trigger stress inside their own body. Another person's sadness can change their heart rate, hormone levels, and emotional state within seconds. That means an empath is not simply nice. They are neurologically wired to scan human behavior with extraordinary precision. And over time, that precision evolves. At first, it looks harmless. A child notices tension in their parents' voices before an argument begins. They notice the tiny shift in facial expression, the forced smile, the silence before anger, the footsteps down the hallway. Their brain starts collecting emotional data constantly because survival depends on prediction. This is how hyper-awareness begins. Psychologists call it adaptive vigilance. The nervous system becomes hypersensitive to emotional change because detecting danger early reduces pain later. But here's what nobody talks about. The brain does not forget survival. Val training, it sharpens it year after year, conversation after conversation, trauma after trauma. Eventually, the empath develops something most people never realize exists: behavioral X-ray vision. They can hear insecurity hidden behind confidence. They can sense jealousy hidden behind compliments. They can feel emotional distance before the relationship officially changes. And because the average person barely understands their own emotions, they have no idea the empath already sees through them. That's where empathy stops being softness and starts becoming psychological advantage. Behavior experts have long understood that human beings leak emotion constantly. Through eye movement, vocal tone, pupil dilation, body tension, breathing patterns, and microexpressions, the nervous system exposes hidden emotional states every second. Most people miss these signals. Empaths don't. Their brains absorb them automatically. That's why certain empaths walk into a room and instantly know who is angry, who feels rejected, who wants approval, and who is pretending to be confident. To outsiders, it feels almost supernatural. But it's neuroscience, the human brain processes. Emotional information faster than conscious thought. In many cases, your nervous system detects threat milliseconds before your logical mind catches up. Empaths simply become unusually skilled at interpreting those subconscious signals. And that skill can become dangerous. Because once you understand human emotion deeply enough, influence becomes easy. You learn which words calm fear, which compliments create attachment, which silences create anxiety, which emotional wounds make people desperate for validation. Most manipulation is not physical, it's emotional. And emotionally intelligent people can become masters at it. This is why some psychologists have become increasingly interested in the concept of the dark empath. Unlike narcissists who often lack emotional empathy, dark empaths understand emotions extremely well. They know exactly what people feel, but instead of protecting emotions, they weaponize them. That's what makes them so difficult to detect. A narcissist often dominates loudly. The dark empath dominates quietly. They make people emotionally dependent without appearing controlling. They mirror your personality, validate your pain, become your emotional safe place, and slowly, almost invisibly, they position themselves at the center of your emotional world. That level of psychological influence is incredibly powerful because human beings are biologically addicted to emotional connection. Studies show that rejection activates the same pain pathways in the brain associated with physical injury. Social attachment is not just emotional, it's neurological. That means the person who controls emotional connection often controls psychological stability. Empaths understand this instinctively, especially wounded empaths, because pain teaches observation. People who grow up emotionally unsafe become experts at reading behavior. Their nervous systems learn that understanding people quickly reduces suffering, but the side effect is terrifying. They become extremely skilled at predicting emotional vulnerability, and once someone can predict vulnerability, they can influence it. That's why some empaths become emotionally addictive to others. They know how to make people feel seen in ways they've never experienced before. And human beings will do almost anything to keep feeling understood. But there's another side to this paper. Dabor that destroys many empaths from the inside. Absorbing emotion constantly comes with a biological cost. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline were never meant to flood the body continuously. Chronic emotional stress has been linked to sleep disorders, anxiety, weakened immunity, digestive problems, memory issues, and even increased inflammation throughout the body. In other words, feeling too much can physically damage you, and eventually the nervous system fights back. This is the moment the empath changes. The warmth disappears. The patience weakens. The emotional generosity dries up, not because they became evil, because survival mode took over. Research on emotional burnout shows that prolonged emotional overload reduces empathy regulation and increases emotional detachment. The brain starts protecting itself by numbing emotional response. That's why deeply empathetic people can suddenly become cold. And when that happens, people around them become shocked. Because the same person who once understood everyone suddenly understands exactly how to hurt them too. The empath knows your insecurities because you revealed them during vulnerable moments. You know what triggers guilt inside you. They know which emotional wounds never healed. And if resentment builds long enough, those insights can become weapons during conflict. A sentence from an angry empath can emotionally destroy someone because it's targeted with surgical precision. Not random anger. Calculated emotional impact. That's the dark side nobody expects. The terrifying truth is that empathy does not automatically create morality. Understanding emotion and protecting emotion are two completely different things. History has shown that some of the most persuasive manipulators in the world were emotionally intelligent. They understood fear, desire, loneliness, hope. Human psychology itself became their tool. That's why emotional intelligence without self-awareness becomes dangerous. So how do you stop empathy from becoming toxic? You develop boundaries before resentment develops. Healthy empaths learn that compassion without limits leads to emotional self-destruction. They stop trying to rescue everyone. They stop absorbing every problem. They stop confusing self-sacrifice with love. Because when empathy operates without boundaries, the nervous system eventua. Ellie collapses under emotional weight, and collapsed people become unpredictable. The healthiest empaths are not the ones who feel the most. They are the ones who regulate the most. They understand that not every emotion belongs to them. Not every broken person should be saved. Not every relationship deserves unlimited access to their energy. That awareness changes everything. Because true emotional intelligence is not about becoming emotionally powerful over others. It's about becoming emotionally powerful over yourself. And the moment an empath masters that skill, they become almost impossible to manipulate. Because now they can read emotion without drowning in it. Understand pain without absorbing it. Feel deeply without losing themselves. And that may be the most dangerous power of all. Nobody notices the moment an empath begins to break. Because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens silently, slowly, one emotional wound at a time, one betrayal at a time, one sleepless night at a time, until eventually the person who once felt everything feels nothing, and that transformation terrifies people. Because the empath who used to comfort everyone suddenly becomes emotionally unreachable. The warmth disappears, the patience vanishes, the softness hardens into distance. And most people think the empath became cruel, but psychology says something far darker happened. Their nervous system overloaded. Research in neuroscience shows the human brain was never designed to carry nonstop emotional stress without recovery. Yet empaths often spend years absorbing other people's pain like emotional sponges. They listen to trauma. They manage conflict. They suppress their own emotions to protect others. And over time, the body begins to pay the price. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline start flooding the system chronically. At first, the signs are subtle: fatigue, brain fog, anxiety, digestive problems, sleep disruption. But eventually the nervous system enters survival mode, and survival mode changes personality. Studies have shown that prolonged emotional stress can physically alter brain function, especially in regions connected to emotional regulation and threat detection. The amygdala becomes hyperactive. The body remains alert even when danger is gone. The empath starts scanning every conversation for hidden tension. This I. We. A trauma response disguised as intuition, and once the brain becomes trapped in that state long enough, trust begins to disappear. The empath no longer relaxes around people. They analyze them. Every delayed text feels suspicious. Every tone change feels personal. Every emotional inconsistency feels threatening. Their nervous system is no longer searching for connection. It's searching for danger. And the terrifying part is they often become very accurate because pain sharpens perception. People who survive emotional chaos become experts at reading behavior. Their brains adapt by learning patterns faster than average people. Tiny facial expressions suddenly mean everything. A forced smile becomes obvious. Fake kindness becomes detectable. Emotional dishonesty becomes impossible to ignore. What others miss completely, the empath sees instantly. But there's a cost to seeing too much. The brain cannot stay emotionally alert forever without consequences. Studies on chronic stress show that emotional overload weakens concentration, increases irritability, damages sleep quality, and even suppresses immune function. Some researchers have linked chronic stress to inflammation associated with heart disease, depression, and memory problems. In other words, emotional burnout is not imaginary. It's biological damage. And many empaths don't realize they are burning out until the damage already controls them. At first, they try harder. They become more patient, more forgiving, more available. They answer every call, carry everyone's problems, absorb everyone's emotions. But eventually the nervous system reaches its limit. And when it does, something shocking happens. The empath emotionally detaches. This is the phase people misunderstand the most. Because detached empaths don't look wounded. They look cold. The person who once gave endless chances suddenly disappears emotionally overnight. Conversations become short. Energy becomes distant. Emotional access gets cut off without warning. People call them selfish. But neuroscience calls it nervous system protection. The brain has one primary goal above all else: survival. And when emotional overload becomes unbearable, the brain starts shutting emotional doors automatically to reduce stress exposure. It's the psychological equivalent of an emergency power shutdown. He, empath is not trying to hurt people. They are trying to survive people. That's why emotionally exhausted empaths often isolate themselves. Solitude lowers stimulation. Silence calms the nervous system. Distance becomes medicine. But isolation creates another danger: overthinking. And overthinking is where the dark side begins growing. Because when emotionally burned out people replay betrayal long enough, resentment forms. The brain starts connecting emotional closeness with pain. Trust begins feeling unsafe. Vulnerability starts feeling dangerous. This changes how the empath interacts with the world. Now, they don't simply feel emotions. They anticipate manipulation. They don't simply listen to words. They search for motives. And because emotionally intelligent people are highly perceptive, they often become extremely skilled at detecting weakness and dishonesty. That awareness can become wisdom or paranoia. The line between the two becomes dangerously thin during emotional burnout. Psychologists studying trauma responses have found that prolonged emotional pain can create defensive behaviors that appear emotionally aggressive. Sarcasm increases. Emotional withdrawal increases. Irritability increases. Compassion fatigue develops. The empath slowly transforms into someone even they barely recognize. And here's the darkest part. Many emotionally burned out empaths secretly stop caring. Not because they're heartless, because they've cared beyond human limits for too long. Imagine absorbing years of conflict, disappointment, emotional manipulation, and betrayal without proper recovery. Eventually, empathy itself becomes painful. Feeling deeply no longer feels beautiful. It feels exhausting. That's why some empaths suddenly become emotionally numb. The numbness shocks people around them because they remember the old version, the endlessly patient version, the emotionally available version. But that person disappeared the moment survival became more important than connection. And once an empath reaches that point, they can become incredibly difficult to reach emotionally. because now they understand something dangerous. They understand how people operate. They see how attention is used for control, how guilt manipulates behavior, how emotional dependency traps people, how fake kindness hides selfish motives. And once someone sees, patterns clearly enough, innocence disappears forever. That's why betrayed empaths often become emotionally intimidating. Not loud, not aggressive, just impossible to fool twice. Pain turned observation into instinct, and instinct turned into emotional armor, but armor comes with consequences. The more emotionally guarded someone becomes, the harder genuine connection feels. The nervous system starts treating closeness itself as risk. Even healthy love can trigger anxiety because the brain remembers what vulnerability cost last time. This is why some empaths sabotage relationships without realizing it. They crave connection deeply, but fear emotional pain even more. So they pull away before attachment grows too strong. And that cycle silently destroys them from the inside, because humans are biologically wired for connection. Studies show loneliness increases stress hormones, weakens immunity, and can even increase the risk of early death. Emotional isolation may protect the empath temporarily, but prolonged isolation slowly damages mental health too. So what's the solution? Not becoming colder, not shutting emotions off completely. The real solution is ional regulation. Healthy empaths learn that boundaries are not cruelty. Distance is not selfishness. Protecting your nervous system is not weakness. They stop absorbing emotions that were never theirs to carry, because empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. And self-destruction always creates darkness eventually. The strongest empaths are not the ones who sacrifice themselves endlessly for others. They are the ones who learn to feel deeply without drowning in other people's chaos. They know when to help, when to walk away, when to forgive, and when silence is the only thing protecting their sanity. Because the truth is, the dark side of an empath is not created by hatred. It's created by emotional exhaustion. And once a deeply empathetic person reaches complete emotional burnout, even love can start feeling dangerous. Most empaths believe their greatest strength is feeling deeply. But psychology suggests something far more important. The real power of an empath is not emotional sensitivity. It's emotional control. Because feeling everything without regulation is not a gift. It's nervous system overload. And millions of people are silently destroying themselves because they confuse emotional absorption with emotional intelligence. The human brain is not built to carry unlimited emotional weight. Every stressful interaction triggers chemical reactions inside the body. Cortisol rises, adrenaline activates, heart rate changes, muscles tense, breathing patterns shift. The nervous system prepares for survival even during emotional conflict. Now imagine this happening every single day, not because of physical danger, because of emotional exposure. Research has shown that chronic stress can increase inflammation throughout the body, weaken immune function, disrupt sleep cycles, impair memory, and increase the risk of anxiety and depression. Some studies even compare prolonged emotional stress to the physiological effects of long-term physical illness. In other words, constant emotional overload physically changes the body, and empaths are especially vulnerable because they often absorb emotions unconsciously. They walk into a room and immediately feel tension. They notice sadness hidden behind smiles. They sense anger before words are spoken. At first, it feels like intuition, but without boundaries, intuition becomes excessive. Austin. This is where most empaths lose themselves. They spend years helping everyone else regulate emotions while completely ignoring their own nervous system. They become emotional caretakers, conflict absorbers, human therapists for broken people. And eventually, their mind collapses under emotional weight, not dramatically, silently. That's what makes it dangerous. The empath keeps smiling while their nervous system slowly burns out from the inside. Scientists studying emotional labor discovered something disturbing. People who constantly manage emotional environments for others often experience higher stress levels, emotional fatigue, and psychological burnout. Their bodies remain in a low-level state of survival for too long. The body keeps score, always. even when the mind pretends everything is fine. That's why emotionally overwhelmed empaths often develop strange symptoms nobody understands at first: chronic fatigue, brain fog, digestive issues, sleep problems, emotional numbness, panic attacks, sudden irritability, social withdrawal. The nervous system eventually demands recovery, and if recovery never happens, the brain forces shut down. This is why high empaths are not the ones who feel the most deeply. They are the ones who regulate emotions the most effectively, because emotional regulation is what separates wisdom from self-destruction. Psychologists define emotional regulation as the ability to manage emotional reactions without becoming controlled by them. That means feeling anger without exploding, feeling sadness without collapsing, feeling stress without drowning in it. But for empaths, this skill becomes even more critical, because empaths often mistake emotional suffering for emotional connection. They believe absorbing someone's pain proves love, but neuroscience says otherwise. Absorbing non-stop emotional pain activates stress systems inside the brain. Over time, empathy without boundaries damages emotional stability instead of strengthening it. That means unhealthy empathy can actually become toxic, not only to the empath, but to everyone around them. Because emotionally overwhelmed people eventually become emotionally reactive. They become defensive, hypervigilant, resentful, passive-aggressive, detached, sometimes even manipulative, and most of the time, they don't even realize it's happening. The nervous system simply reached survival mode. That's why boundaries are not selfish. They are biological protection. A boundary is not rejection. It's emotional filtration. Healthy empaths understand this deeply. They know not every problem belongs to them. Not every emotional crisis deserves unlimited access to their energy. Not every relationship deserves endless patience. And that realization changes everything. Because once an empath learns boundaries, their entire personality transforms. The constant exhaustion starts disappearing. Mental clarity returns. Sleep improves. Emotional stability strengthens. Why? Because the brain finally experiences safety. Safety is one of the most underestimated psychological needs in human existence. When the nervous system feels unsafe emotionally, it remains alert constantly. Stress hormones continue flowing. The body never fully relaxes. But boundaries create psychological safety. And psychological safety allows healing. That's why emotionally healthy empaths protect their environment carefully. They become selective about conversations, selective about relationships, selective about energy exposure. Not because they hate people, because they understand what emotional chaos costs biologically. Studies on overstimulation show that excessive emotional and sensory exposure can reduce concentration, increase anxiety, and impair emotional regulation. The brain requires recovery periods to function properly. That means rest is not laziness for empaths. It's nervous system maintenance. Silence matters. Sleep matters. Solitude matters. And yet many empaths feel guilty for needing those things. That guilt destroys them slowly, because the empath starts believing their value comes from emotional sacrifice. They become addicted to rescuing people, helping people, fixing people. But eventually they learn a brutal truth. You cannot heal others by destroying yourself. That lesson changes an empath forever, especially after betrayal, because betrayal forces emotional awakening faster than comfort ever could. The empath finally realizes that kindness without boundaries attracts manipulation. Narcissistic personalities often seek highly empathetic people because emotional generosity makes control easier. The empath gives endless understanding while receiving emotional chaos in return, until one day the nervous system refuses to continue. And when that happens, the empath becomes unrecognizable. Not cruel. Clear. They stop explaining themselves endlessly. Stop chasing people emotionally. Stop tolerating disrespect. Stop sacrificing mental peace for toxic connection. And suddenly people accuse them of changing. But the truth is, they finally healed enough to stop abandoning themselves. This is what emotional mastery actually looks like. Not becoming emotionless, not becoming cold, becoming balanced. Because true emotional intelligence is not about feeling every emotion intensely. It's about deciding which emotions deserve access to your mind. That level of control is powerful and rare. Most people are controlled by emotional reactions they barely understand. Their mood changes based on other people's behavior constantly. Their peace depends on validation. Their identity depends on emotional approval. Healthy empaths escape that trap. They learn to observe emotions without drowning inside them. And neuroscience supports this idea strongly. Studies on mindfulness and emotional regulation show that self-awareness practices can reduce stress responses, improve emotional control, lower anxiety, and even change activity in brain regions linked to fear and emotional reactivity. In other words, the brain can be trained. Emotional stability is not luck, it's conditioning. That means empaths are not doomed to emotional exhaustion forever. But they must stop romanticizing suffering first. Pain is not proof of love. Self-destruction is not compassion. And emotional burnout is not spiritual depth. The strongest empath in the room is usually the calmest one. The one who protects their peace without guilt. The one who walks away from emotional chaos without needing revenge. The one who understands people deeply, but no longer allows broken people to consume their identity. Because once an empath truly masters emotional regulation, something extraordinary happens. Their sensitivity stops being a weakness and becomes psychological power. Now they can sense manipulation without absorbing it, understand pain without carrying it, love deeply without losing themselves, and stay emotionally calm while everyone else loses control. That is the final evolution of an empath, not endless sacrifice, not emotional suffering, emotional male, astery.